I think that we have to take control of the idea that a Jewish narrative can't be a mainstream narrative.
This is the Book of Life. I'm Heidi Estrin. It all started with Marjorie Engel's tablet article, Enough with the Holocaust Books for Children, published in April of 2015. As she says in that article, if you dropped an alien into the children's section of a library, it would think Jews disappeared after World War II. Then Arthur A. Levine shared Marjorie's article on Facebook, commenting that this smart article says many things that I've been saying for a while. 20 comments later, Alyssa Gershowitz and Yael Levy had thoroughly discussed the difficulties and triumphs of getting non-Holocaust books for kids published, and Barbara Bates and I, blogger and podcaster respectively, had started wondering aloud how we could bring more attention to these issues. Thus, this podcast episode was born. Barbara Bates is a children's author and book reviewer and past chair of the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee. Alyssa Gershowitz is an editor at the Horn Book and a current member of the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee. Marjorie Engel is a columnist for Tablet magazine. She's currently working on a book about the history of the Jewish mother. Arthur A. Levine is a children's author and publisher with his own imprint at Scholastic. Yael Levy holds a J.M. in Law and Religion from Emory University School of Law. She writes Jewish young adult and women's fiction and is the author of Brooklyn Love.
Let's start with Marjorie. Sum up the point you were originally making in your article for Tablet.
I felt that there are so many worthy topics of discussion in Jewish culture and history. There is so much diversity within the Jewish world. You know, we're the people of the book. We have so many stories. And yet it seemed to me that the books that were getting the most attention, shall we say, the books that were winning a disproportionate number of Sidney Taylor Awards, which is the Association of Jewish Libraries Awards for the best books, a lot of them were Holocaust books. And a lot of them I felt were not great books, but were being graded on a curve because they were Holocaust books. And I wondered what we could do to point kids to books that reflected much more of the diversity of the American Jewish experience, and also just taught kids about their own heritage. I work for Tablet, which is a Jewish magazine, and you know, a big question that came out of this big Pew study about Jewish Americans, one thing is that we feel that Holocaust is central to American Jewish identity. And that's a little bit creepy. I'm looking at the study right now. 73% of respondents listed the Holocaust as the primary essential of Jewish identity, more so than leading an ethical and moral life or observing Jewish law and traditions. So that's a little unnerving. So what do we do to give kids a portrayal of Judaism that is also happy and positive and full of music and art and literature and not just death?
When the article was posted on Tablet's Facebook page, it got an enormous number of comments, and many of those comments disagreed with the article and touted the importance of never forget. But I got the sense that many of these commenters just read the headline rather than the whole article, because you're not really advocating doing away with Holocaust fiction. You're advocating promoting more variety of subject matter. So how did you feel about the responses that you got to your article?
My editor-in-chief bought me a necklace a couple of years ago from Etsy that says "Never read the comments," and I, like to strap that on before I wade into Facebook. But yeah, people mostly don't read the stories before spouting off, and I feel like Tablet's commenters specifically tend to be really venomous a lot of the time, and because we are a magazine that publishes both the left and the right, we get attacked as both horrible, self-hating destructors of the Jewish people and as Palestinian-loving, whatever. So we get attacked from both sides. But I saw that Debbie Levy, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, who's a writer I respect a lot, wrote on her blog at great length about why I was wrong. And I'm really happy to hear from people who disagree with me and can be articulate and thoughtful about it.
let's take a poll. We can all agree that remembering the Holocaust is important, and there are many excellent titles that help us do that. But do you feel that the number of Holocaust books for children are disproportionate within the genre of Jewish children's literature? So let's go around. Let's start with Barbara.
Hi, guys. The one topic I do want to address that Marjorie brought up, as a member of the Sidney Taylor Committee and a former chair of the committee, we evaluate these books based on their literary merit, and the Holocaust books are not graded on the curve in any way. And I think the bigger picture that we have to look at is, yes, we need more diverse books in Jewish literature, but let's remember that there were 6 million people who were lost. That's 6 million stories, not to mention the people who survived or the people who helped those who survived. So there are so many stories to be told, and I don't know that we need to pull back on those stories. Maybe we need more diversity, more other kinds of stories that we celebrate. I think those books are out there. It's just a matter of making them more available to children and to families. I also think it's really important to acknowledge that within the field of Holocaust literature, that it's not just stories about death, it's stories about life, and it's stories about celebrating life, and it's stories about children, and it's stories about adults, and stories about artists, and all different kinds of people. There's diversity within Holocaust literature. So I feel really tender about the topic. I totally appreciate what Marjorie's saying, but I don't want anyone to feel like they can't tell their story or their parents' story or their grandparents' story. I want us to share our stories, even if they're not well written, because I think it's important that we share what's in our hearts. And with so many survivors passing on now, I almost think it's more important than ever. Yes, we also need other stories about Jewish people experiencing all kinds of things, but I really think these are two separate topics. And, I want to just mention a book that was a winner of the Sidney Taylor, which was a Berlin Boxing Club, which is a beautiful piece of literature, and it's about a relatable boy. And I think these stories are so important that I'm a little concerned about giving the message that, oh, guys, pull back here, because some of the books aren't as good as they should be.
This is Arthur. I'm going to jump in. I don't think that is the message at all. I mean, I think that the strong parallel that comes to my mind is books about slavery. That's such a critical part of the African-American experience. It was horrible, and it's something that we have to continually come to grips with, and there are always more stories about slavery. But the black experience in the United States is much more than slavery. And if we were in a situation where the primary books that were coming to our attention were books about slavery, then that would be a great disservice to African American culture. And I think that is what I responded to in Marjorie's article. As a publisher and as a consumer of books that feature Jewish characters and Jewish culture, I have found much more limitation than I wish there were. As an organizer of the BK Book Festival in Montclair, New Jersey, every year the bookseller tries to bring wonderful contemporary books to the festival to sell, and they have a hard time. There still winds up being, primarily Holocaust books and books set in Helm. And, and I feel like the message is the Jews we want to talk about are the ones who were in the Holocaust or in, 17th century Poland.
I have to say, this is Alyssa, and I'm going to be cheerful because I have to say that when I joined the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee last year, I joked that I thought I was going to need a Valium every time I picked up a book because it would be all Holocaust all the time. And I found I was really surprised. Maybe it was just an exceptionally great year, but also working at the Hornbook, I think that there is a nice diversity of Jewish experience that is being portrayed now. Not nearly enough, not as much as we would like. But The Last Bastion, the trashy YA about Jewish girls, we've been reading trashy YA about Jewish girls, which I just think is kind of horrible, but also kind of fantastic that it's just as bad as Goyish girls. They're getting in the same sort of trouble, and they're Jewish, but that's not the central part of the story, although that is part of the story. I mean, I can point to many examples that I was really heartened to see what was out there. And so I think that maybe finding those books and being able to celebrate them or even just identify them, because, some of the trashy YA you don't necessarily want to give an award to, but it is nice to know that it's out there. So I think part of it is being able to communicate to people what there is and that there is more than just Holocaust literature, which I think also is vital and has a really important place. But I do think there's some steam behind the Judaism as one facet of ordinary life in books for kids now, which is really nice, exciting.
Good. Let's give Yael a chance to chime in.
I don't think it's even a question of feel. I think anyone has to just walk into a library and you want to ask the librarian, what do you have of Jewish interest? And you will find dozens of books that are about the Holocaust and hardly any about anything else regarding the Jewish experience. It strikes me that a lot of librarians and booksellers are looking at the Jewish experience through the lens of the Holocaust and might not be aware that there's so much more going on and that there's so much more that's important to writers to express and for readers to read about. Of course, there's always room for another fantastic story that takes place in the Holocaust or what somebody learns from it. But what about the generations after? What about the kids who grew up with parents who were survivors, the grandchildren? What is their experiences like? How does coming from that kind of horrific experience impact on their lives trying to just be regular kids? It's always there. There's always this horror show in the background. I try to liken it to, my husband and I are big fans of The Walking Dead. Mm-hmm. And I look at my husband and I go, can you imagine if this situation that Rick and company are going through is only happening in their community and right next door in North Carolina, everything's fine. And then they go to another state and after everything they've endured, and then everyone's going on with their lives, enjoying their nice life as Americans. There's so much horror and strangeness and sadness that is going into each and every one of these characters that when you're participating in normal American life, it makes these characters just have to stop and think about things, and that's definitely part of the Jewish American experience at this point.
I wonder if part of the issue is that the Holocaust has been partially packaged and appropriated by the broader American culture to the point where it's easy to kind of present Nazis, for instance, as just a generic bad guy. And the whole narrative of these very clear-cut bad guys who the good guys fought gets to be very appealing on a broad American scale. And that therefore sometimes makes a really wonderful Holocaust book break out, as they say, into increased popularity. And it's a narrative with which lots of Americans are comfortable and interested, whereas maybe it feels like it's a harder sell to say, here's a really lovely Reconstructionist boy who's trying to figure out what mitzvah project to do that will be really meaningful for his bar mitzvah. That actually could be a great story. I mean, that could be a beautiful literary novel, but it's not as tidily packaged to the broader culture. Does that make sense?
I think that makes perfect sense. This is Barbara, if I can just jump in for a second. And I think that's a question from a publishing standpoint as well. And I know that a book like that, I can just read the rejection letter from an editor saying, this is lovely, but it's much too niche for our house.
Mm-hmm.
I think that book sounds a lot like something Jordan Sonnenblick would write. He wrote a book called Curveball, The Year I Lost My Grip, that was about a 13-year-old whose whole identity is pitching, and suddenly he can't, he's been injured and he can't pitch anymore, and it's about him getting close to his 80. So I feel like there are these beautiful and literary books that are out there. I'm coming at this as a critic and a parent and not as a librarian. I think about everything as, is this spinach if I give it to a kid? So one thing that's great about the Berlin Boxing Club is which I agree is an amazing book, is it is so not spinach. It's boxing, and there's a transgender, drag queen. It's so weird and so great. So basically, I think that there's a great variety of books that are out there, but they're not getting the attention they deserve. And to a degree, I think we have to blame parents, too, because we take our kids to these synagogue book fairs and give them $20, and the synagogue book fairs tend to have a whole lot of Holocaust. And we have to do the work of finding the trashy teen novels. I think it's great that they exist, and it's part of what we want to do as parents is say, read for fun. Deliver the crappy books. Give them crap. I give them the good stuff, too.
We don't have a responsibility only to our own kids. I think that it's always a mistake to think that we're only speaking to ourselves when we write or publish or promote these books. I think that we have to take control of the idea that a Jewish narrative can't be a mainstream narrative. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that we have to stop saying in some ways this is just for our synagogue. Like, that's part of the barrier to larger adoption is that we take that on ourselves. We say, okay, here's a book that has this Jewish character, so that's falling into that other editor you quoted saying this is a niche book. Well, just because the kid is Jewish doesn't mean that it's niche. Like, that's the same argument that is used against all kinds of diversity. Well, there's this Latina character in New York, it's only going to appeal to New York Latinas. No, that's her narrative. That narrative is an important narrative. That's something that everyone can enjoy. I feel like we have to make a bigger effort to make that case for our books.
I think we've got a two-pronged problem here. One is finding the good books in a variety that reflect a diversity of experience, and not just finding them for ourselves, but sharing them with our neighbors. And how do we get the word out in a way where we can make these wonderful gems that we find? Because I believe they're out there. I believe there's room for all these stories, and it's just a matter of them finding a home with a publisher, finding them a home with a reader, and then sharing them with the bigger world. And I think that's kind of what we're challenged with now, is people who are really passionate about bringing Jewish children's books into the hands of readers.
I just read this crazy book, trashy YA to the extreme, fantasy, sci-fi, vampire YA, where alternate history, Hitler has unleashed a virus, turning most of the world into vampires. And then there's a little community of immune people who are fighting back against the Third Reich. And they use a language. I mean, the world is the Third Reich. It's very clear parallel. It goes to the idea of, pop culture and mainstream and all of these issues. And it's not specifically a Jewish story. There's one character who is Jewish, but the allegory is there. It really has broad appeal because it's not specific enough to exclude people from saying, well, this isn't my experience. But at the same time, I mean, it's the Nazis, and they've won, and they hate the Jews, and that's there in the society. So, and again, this isn't the best book ever written in the whole wide world, but there are these little titles, and there are ways to get to these stories. Maybe I would call that a Holocaust book, but it's a Holocaust vampire, alternate history, post-apocalyptic.
Well, you should mention the title if you want in this broadcast to reach somebody who might like the book. You should mention the title.
I think I need to send a book list later because I am horrible with titles. Unfortunately, working on a book. I have the computer open in front of me. I will look.
The one thing that I want to add to that is, and this is Heidi again, the amount of anti-Semitism in the world is disproportionate, and so I wonder if that makes the disproportionality of Holocaust books appropriate because it's a very unpleasant topic, but it doesn't go away, and so we do have to face it. But on the other hand, does talking about it that much help anything? I mean, on the one hand, yes, you need to never forget. You need to know what happened. The Jews and the non-Jews, everybody needs to understand what happened. But if that's all you talk about, does that just bring on more anti-Semitism because people are getting annoyed with you that you won't shut up about it?
So I'd like to jump in.
I think we all want to jump in on that one too.
But what I have to say is I don't think talking about it is what brings on anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism is a sickness, like it's just an illness, and there's nothing a person can do about it. And we don't need to let our kids dwell in it. I grew up in a post-Holocaust Brooklyn with a lot of neighbors as survivors. The whole education I got in my Beis Yaakov was very much about fear. And my whole Jewish experience was a very fearful one. And you can't create when you're enmeshed in fear. That's not a Judaism I want to hand down to my children. And actually, right now, there's a huge numbers of kids growing up in Hasidic and Haredi homes who are leaving. And a lot of it is because they've just been handed down fear God, fear neighbor, fear everyone. They're all out to kill you. If you don't behave, you're going to get zapped by a lightning bolt. No one wants to live like that. And that's not going to help us as Jews. It's not going to help the world with our mission of Tikkun Olam. It's not going to help anybody to just be afraid. And we need to acknowledge that fear and acknowledge the hate, but we need to be putting that in a little box and letting ourselves move on and experience life and enjoy it in all its complexities and write about it and share these stories.
Yeah, and I completely agree that Holocaust books do not bring about anti-Semitism. I will continue to publish great stories set during the Holocaust. Last story has not been told, but I do think we need to get together and brainstorm about how to make other books successful. I mean, I think that the We Need Diverse Books campaign is a brilliant one, and that is this group of authors who are getting together and actually trying to come up with ways to break through the cycle of argument that is, well, this book won't sell, therefore we shouldn't publish it, therefore those books don't exist, by really trying to figure out ways to promote great, diverse books. I think we as Jews have to be part of that conversation, and I think we have to have our own internal conversation. Let anti-Semitism take care of itself. We have to take care of promoting what's great about us.
But do you think that Jewish books are included in that diversity discussion?
Yeah, I think those diversity discussions are diverse. And
right.
I think in fact we can't wait to be asked, we are part of that conversation.
Oh, I love that you said that, because it's been something that's really been sort of sitting with me for a while, as I feel like, gosh, can you include us? Can we be part of this? And
we is us. We is us.
Yeah. I have had a hard time getting at least the Twitter team behind We Need Diverse Books to acknowledge Jewish books.
And I think the thought is that, oh gosh, there are so many. We're the people of the book. We support books. There's Jewish book publishers, and I don't think we're included in the discussion in the way that we should be.
I had an experience at the Hornbook Symposium where I was part of a discussion of diverse books, and it was an extremely left-leaning group of people. And one woman said, well, Jews don't need this because they've got rich people who buy their entire print runs and sell them themselves or whatever. Yeah. And there is an idea out there, and it's an anti-Semitic idea. Or maybe it's just, let's not even put that label on it. Maybe let's just say it's a falsehood, that it's easy to publish a book about contemporary Jewish kid and have it succeed. I think, again, we have to combat that. Like, just because we have been, quote unquote, a successful minority doesn't make us any less of a minority. We are a minority, and we have the challenges of being a minority. What I bring that back to is the idea of, this is a publishing term, a print run. If you're a minority and the world embraces the idea that books featuring minorities are only bought by minorities, then you must accept the idea that your audience is small because of who you are. And that's what we have to combat. And that's part of what We Need Diverse Books is combating.
So we need to find a way to show up to the party whether we have an invitation or not.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think mostly we wouldn't be welcome. I think we would mostly be welcome.
I also feel like, though, the We Need Diverse Books campaign isn't trying to further the agenda of one minority group over another. So I think,
right.
I mean, I think they want every part of publishing to be more representative.
Yes.
For everybody, for many different groups. So I think if we're just saying we just want more Jewish books, I mean, we wouldn't say that, but if our mindset is we just want more Jewish books, and that is the way that we're approaching the We Need More Diverse Books campaign, I don't think that that's exactly in keeping with our mission.
Right.
So just keep that in mind as just a larger, because to be frank, there are other groups that are starting from well behind Jewish books. I mean, if we're lucky, we get one decent non-Trail of Tears Native American book every season, if we're lucky.
That's completely true.
I mean, I'm not a fan of my minority group is worse represented than yours, but there is that reality too. So if we think broader as diverse books lifting up all minority groups, however they're defined, then that's a really good way to approach it.
Absolutely correct.
That's absolutely correct, but it's also partly incorrect. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leap in here. Yes, it's absolutely correct. Like tikkun olam, if we embrace that, that means making the world a better place. And that means making the world a more diverse place and supporting diverse cultures and reaching out to other people who are different from us. That is a strong part of our culture and our mission. I couldn't agree with you more. I am a founding member of, I'm not like on the board of We Need Diverse Books, but that is my whole life as a publisher. No one could believe that more and be further a supporter. And at the same time, if we don't say we are part of this because of this false idea of privilege, it will not help the problem. As a publisher who has really an incredibly diverse list, if you look at the list of books that Arthur A. Levine Books has published, I've really managed a healthy diversity, and it's an ongoing big effort to have books by Latinos and books by African Americans and books by Asians, to really try to make my list have many voices. And it has not been easy for me to find Jewish voices to add to that mix. It's been one or two in the 20 years that I've been publishing. I don't get a lot, and there are barriers. They're the same barrier in publishing terms to getting a book out and having it be perceived to have a big audience and have a lot of support as there are to other kinds of diverse books. That's the reality of publishing. This is a publishing story. It started out with why are the Holocaust books predominant? And you have to really look at that. You can't apologize our way out of being part of the solution.
So are you saying you're not receiving manuscripts and then you're not getting support for the manuscripts that you do receive that you would want to develop?
Yes, I would say that Jewish books are perceived to be niche books. And I don't get a lot of them.
Watch out, man. Slush pile.
Well, what I'm looking for is the great novel that features a Jewish protagonist or has some element. I think specific culture and characters who have specific beliefs, that's part of what makes them vibrant, real characters. So yes, obviously, I'd like to see Jews just as I'd like to see other groups that really make a culture and a religion, perhaps, part of their meaningful life. That's what makes them come alive.
Can I say also within Judaism, I think it's really important to recognize a diversity of experience, because if Judaism is only seen as one way of being practiced, or two or three, then that is also really limiting for the people who are trying to tell their stories or create experiences or characters that are authentic to them.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, and stop me if I'm talking too much, but I also think that is one place where we, within our Jewish conversation, can do better. Like critiques of Jewish books tend to say things like Jews don't behave this way, or that's not Jewish enough, or, and not recognize that diversity.
Yeah. Also, our perception of Jewish is frequently Ashkenazi Jewish, and there are so many Sephardic stories that are not getting told, and that's another kind of diversity that we should be seeing.
Yeah. One of my favorite books last year was I Lived on Butterfly Hill, which was a story of a family in Chile. And there was a lot that I didn't know. I mean, it's fiction, but I didn't know a lot about that history. A beautiful book, wonderfully written, but also really informative about Jewish life and history and culture, and a piece that I hadn't really known too much about.
I'm writing all of these titles down, by the way. Promote them with all my might, even if I didn't publish them.
The vampire book is called Becoming Darkness, by the way.
Yay!
Okay.
I'm in.
Don't get that excited. It's pretty out there.
I don't care if it's crappy. I want, it's good to encourage this stuff. It's, fine. Don't give it an award, but yay.
It's 500 pages too. I didn't mention that.
Oh crap!
I'm glad you guys can read that. That is not my cup of tea, and that should be fine. We should be having all of these books, some of which I should be able to say to myself, yeah, I'm not going to read that.
Right.
No, that's exactly
And
right.
and have it be fine.
Yeah.
I actually think we're still a little bit in the situation where I actually do feel I have to buy every Jewish book that comes out that's within reason because I have to support that. I have to be part of the group telling publishers that this is a market. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because these are market forces.
Arthur, you had said on Facebook that as a publisher, you need to achieve higher sales of these kind of books to make your corporate parent excited about publishing more of them.
Right.
And so
that's what I've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the question is, how do we do that? And then also you had said as a consumer in the target market for Jewish kids that you're not aware of many of the titles that had been mentioned on Facebook. And you said there's clearly something missing. So what's missing?
Right. What is missing? I wish I knew that. Maybe we need to be both part of We Need Diverse Books, and maybe there needs to be a kind of coalition that will promote all kinds of Jewish books, because it's weird that I don't know about them. Like, you know, we had that conversation on Facebook, and I mean, I felt that it's perfectly reasonable to have someone reel off a list of titles to say, well, there is stuff. You're not right that there isn't stuff. So I could accept, okay, I'm not right, but how can I be such an active consumer of Jewish books and not know about these books? You know, I'm a person who literally every summer I'm calling around to all publishers. I'm obviously very connected to publishers, so I'll call around. Do you have a Jewish book? Do you have anything for me this year? Is there anything I can promote in my book festival? And I'm not hearing about these books.
I'd be happy to respond to that.
Please.
Hi, this is Barbara, and I think a lot of it is because the Jewish book community is somewhat insular. What's happened is the Jewish children's book community is so active and so engaged and so passionate that it's actually become a separate community. We kind of relate to each other and we share these great ideas and we share these great books, but I guess we're not getting the word out there in the way that we should. And let me just give you a couple of resources that I think would be helpful.
Great.
On a more formal organizational standpoint, there's AJL, the Association of Jewish Libraries. You can become a member. You can access their website, get their newsletters, which has a children and young adult section of reviews, and they review everything that comes out. There's also Jewish Book World, which is a professional journal
I get that.
review, and they have almost all of the books of the year out as well. On an informal level, there's blogs like my own, Jewish Books for Children, where I do not do reviews. I do interviews with authors, publishers, editors, you know, anyone who's really passionate about Jewish books. My goal is to create a community. There's Barbara Krasner's blog, The Whole Megillah, which is really focused towards writers, but is wonderful for families and readers and even children. And there are different organizations that you can belong to on Facebook that talk about more current books. There's also the PJ Library, which is an amazing, talk about Tikkun Olam, oh my goodness. They give books free to families, and they have booklets, and they've really created a resurgence in Jewish book publishing and infusing it with dollars that really count, which is fantastic. Right. And what's nice is they reach out to a broad range of publishers as well. They don't work with just Jewish publishers. So I think the issue is the resources are there, the books are there, the passion is there. We just have to become part of the broader community and not just kind of chatting amongst ourselves so passionately. We need to get the word out to others as well.
Right. Is it possible that any of these organizations can be hiring specialists who do marketing that can take the Jewish books and market them to the broader public? And that's a very niche position to do, because what I'm seeing from the mainstream books and mainstream publishing houses, their marketing teams get a Jewish book and don't necessarily know what to do with it. So maybe if from one of these organizations, if there were specialists and they knew this is how we are going to go about getting our Jewish books into mainstream audiences, general publishers might be more receptive to all kinds of Jewish books.
Well, the problem you have there is these are not sales and marketing organizations.
I know,
So
but I'm just wondering if they could hire, maybe they could, that's another step that they can do.
That's an interesting question. This is Heidi again. I wanted to point out also something Barbara didn't mention but has been very involved in, which is the Sidney Taylor Book Awards. I'm a past chair of that committee, so is Barbara. And every year, the Sidney Taylor Committee selects up to, about 20-something books that get gold medals, silver medals, and notable status. So that's a great list right there that comes out every year to say what's new and what's excellent. And we do the best we can to market that list of winners to, really announce that in as many venues as we can to try to educate people about what's out there. There's always some Holocaust books that make it onto that list because they're really well done, but there's always lots of other stuff as well.
Right. We do a blog tour every year that really gets the word out about all of these books, and we don't just promote them on Jewish blogs, but on all kinds of kidlit blogs. And you can go to jewishlibraries.org and click on the awards, go to Sidney Taylor, and there is a list of the award winners all the way back to the very beginning. And you can just print that out, and you have a whole handbook of the history of award-winning children's literature. So that's a pretty terrific resource as well.
I have another question on a different angle that I wanted to go back to, unless anybody has other resources that they want to mention right now.
My year-end list tends to be, I have a lot of not-so-literary books on it because mine is aimed at getting Jewish parents to buy books with Jewish characters in them. So my stuff is basically, is it going to be kid crack? And if it's not going to be kid crack, then I'm less likely to put it on unless it's super amazing. So my lists are always a mix.
So these are the lists that are published on tablet?
On tablet every year.
Yeah. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with promoting lists of kid crack books. It doesn't have to all be literary prize winners. It should be the whole range.
Right. It's a nice counterpoint to books that are noted for literary merit.
One more resource is that this is Alyssa, all of my information comes from the Hornbook Guide Online, which has a very thorough subject search. And if you search under Jews or Judaism, you'll find a lot of books.
One more resource is the Jewish Values Finder. Linda Silver, who is a Jewish librarian that everybody knows and loves, she actually has a resource where you can go online, and it's on the Association of Jewish Libraries website, and plug in your area of interest, and books will come up. There's a hard copy as well. You can actually get it in a book, but it's nice that it's ongoing and always updated.
Yeah, that's a good database. This is Heidi again. Let me also point out that for this podcast, The Book of Life, I've got a library thing, the website library thing, that lets you create a catalog of books. And so when I interview somebody, I put their book into that collection. So that's a way to look up all of the books that have been covered on the show. And the show's been going for 10 years. So that's a lot of books. They're not all children's books, but probably more than half are because that's my area of interest. So that's another resource. Okay, so here's a question particularly for Yael. Yael, you had emailed me that we have many Holocaust books because that confirms a narrative of Christian theology upon which Western society was built. So please explain what you mean by that.
Wow.
If you can remember
what
you're talking about.
No, I was thinking about it, that a lot of the ideas about the Holocaust would definitely work within assumptions that are already there within Christianity, that we are not going to be welcomed in places. We're going to continue to suffer, to be hated, and we're going to be dispersed. This is part of Christian theology. I think also the image of the suffering Jew. These are images that are definitely there. They're subtle, and they're not necessarily anything somebody's thinking about, but there's definitely this element there. And that's just something I was thinking about.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's really interesting. The idea that Jews are supposed to be suffering, so a Holocaust book fits right in with that and feels very acceptable probably to somebody who has that in the back of their mind.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking.
Okay.
Okay. Yael, you had also made the point on Facebook that editors are not always receptive to acquiring manuscripts that reflect the full range of Jewish experiences. So what makes you say that?
Writing from my own experiences, having my first book, getting born, it was very crazy roller coaster ride. And not just myself, but almost all of my colleagues had similar experiences when they were writing specifically Jewish books. If they wrote a book that wasn't Jewish, it didn't even have to be their best work. It wasn't that kind of roller coaster. But when you have a Jewish book, it's going to be a real challenge to find the right house and the right editor and everything. It's just the kind of comments that I received, many of them were just strange. There's just no other way of putting it. And it wasn't just my own journey. It was anytime I'd review that with any of my writer friends who were also getting published, all around, same story. Specifically my work, writing about young women trying to find their place in the world, in the Orthodox community. I initially saw it as a young adult book. I had to squeeze that book and change it so many times in order for publishers to be able to accept it. And even when it did get accepted, it had to be changed to suit other sensibilities and requirements that so much of my story was dampened. I'm okay with having to stretch a book in order to make an editor and publisher feel good about it, but as a writer, you want to be able to tell an authentic story, whether or not it's comfortable or makes people feel good. You want to be able to tell your story. So specifically with my book, it was strange because my protagonists were 18, 19, 20, around there. It would have been upper end of YA. But a lot of the YA publishers said, well, you're talking about marriage. There's no way our mainstream readers are going to be able to relate to that. Your average 18-year-old mainstream American kid isn't thinking about marriage. But that was my story. And I think most 18-year-olds could open their minds a little bit and read about a different culture. That's what reading is for. That's what the excitement is, the whole window into other cultures. But the publishers have to know that they're going to be able to sell their books. So I could respect what they were feeling and thinking. I just wish that there was more of an understanding that when you're talking about a particular culture, it's not going to fit into a mainstream narrative. It's going to be a different story. Another aspect of my books was just writing about community. Community is very, very important in Judaism in general, and incredibly important if they're coming from an Orthodox community. The voice of the community is probably as important to the individual as the individual's personal wants and needs and desires. They're both equally strong in the individual. So to have to dampen the voice of the community for the hero's journey, or to hear that the hero is passive because her community's voice is so important in her own mind, it's very difficult to want to continue writing when you feel like your own voice is being snuffed out in favor of what does mainstream want to read. It's a painful part of the journey, and I've decided, even though YA is my true love, I'm going to just focus now on my adult work and see if I could circle back to that at a later date, because I'm happy to work with editors, but not at the expense of killing the story that I need to tell.
I really feel what you're saying. Listening to you as a publisher, I understand how frustrating that must have been. Part of me thinks that it's sometimes hard to judge what was going on with your manuscript. Like when you have a bunch of people saying the same thing, like this doesn't fit into this category, the answer is not necessarily change the category. It's change the people you're approaching. There are certainly tons of publishers who publish narratives about 18 and 19-year-olds who are considering marriage. So you could immediately take that objection off the table if you weren't publishing people who are primarily focused on kids who are 12 to 15, or whatever the typical YA range is. But you kind of had a bunch of obstacles at once. That isn't necessarily a Jewish problem, but more of a where you're targeting your story problem.
Well, that's good to hear. But I've heard from other friends just strange stories about trying to get their Jewish manuscript published because a lot of the publishers aren't getting what they're trying to do and what they're saying.
Oh, and I totally get that. I absolutely hear that and would validate that experience. It is difficult. We are a minority, and we do face those challenges.
Well, I think that speaks directly to our topic of diverse books, and that's exactly what we need to broaden our range of what we're looking for and what we can relate to. So I think it just underscores the notion that we need to be included in that discussion.
Right.
And this is reminding me of an article, an essay that Zetta Elliott wrote in a recent issue of School Library Journal about the difficulty of getting the mainstream publishing to accept her literature on the Black experience, and that she felt that they just couldn't relate and couldn't understand, and she was turning to self-publishing to make sure that it got out there and that readers could get to it. So again, I think the solution is that we need diverse books, and we definitely need to keep on working hard with that movement in all the ways that we've been talking about. Do you guys feel ready to move on to making actual suggestions of titles?
Yes. Sure.
Okay, so if that alien came down to planet Earth and said, you don't have any books about Jews, so no, what's going on? So what books would we suggest?
Okay, so this is Marjorie, and I thought about picture books first and then middle grade and YA. So for picture books, I thought Gathering Sparks is beautiful. Of course, I didn't write down all the authors, but it's Howard Schwartz and Christina Swarner, who's a really beautiful illustrator, did that. He takes sort of Jewish legends, and that's a Tikkun Olam book, actually. And it just explains the concept of Tikkun Olam as Gathering Sparks, and it's beautiful. Emma's poem, which is about Statue of Liberty. Beautiful Yetta the Yiddish Chicken, which is freaking hilarious. Nama and the Ark at Night, which is a bedtime book in the Ark that has similar to this, more fancy pants Sandra Boynton, the boat.
Beautifully
book.
illustrated. Yeah.
Beautifully illustrated. Lippman Pike, Rich Michelson's thing about the first big Jewish baseball player, the first home run king. Fievel's Flying Horses, which is actually a Jewish publisher. That's Carben, and it's a look at the first makers of carousel horses. It's fiction, but it's good afterword, and it's based, in fact, about the people who made Coney Island and these ark carvers from the old country who came over and made horses. And my kid adored it. Just any kid who likes carousels will love it. And these are all published in the last 4 years, maybe. And then for older kid books, Small, Medium, at Large is middle grade. For me, it's the Holy Grail, which I always joke about. Funny, middle grade, Jewish characters, but not heart-wrenching, just like set in the real world. And this is somebody whose Bubby is a ghost and visits her, hence the name Small, Medium, at Large. The Doll Shop Upstairs, The Cats in the Doll Shop, those are Jonas Eldest McDonough, and those are great. How Mirka Got Her Sword, graphic novels, humongous crossover. Everyone loves those. They are flawless. I've heard other people tout Jewish graphic novels, and I try to be quiet and polite, but some of the art is just not that great. I'm sorry. And Mirka is great. Hush, which is really, really dark YA in the Haredi community about sexual abuse. Just when I'm thinking about nonfiction, The Unspeakable Crime is a book about, now I'm blanking on his name, the lynching, the Albert. Anyway, it's a historical, scary story that's really good. Deadly, which nobody read, by Julie Chibaro, it's a YA about a Jewish girl on the Lower East Side assisting a scientist as they try to unravel Typhoid Mary and where this epidemic is coming from. So it's a sciencey book, and it's a mystery, and it's a kind of romance, and it's so good. The whole story of Half a Girl is super diverse in that it is Indian and Jewish. It's a beautiful book.
Vera Hiranandani is the author of that one.
Yes. And Alex London's Proxy is our go-to birthday gift for 6th, 7th, 8th graders, which is gay and Jewish and sci-fi. And it is really freaking good and exciting and a bat out of hell of a read, and you've never given it to a kid who hasn't loved it. That's my list.
Good list. Okay, who wants to go next?
Well, mine's really brief, so I'd be happy to go next. This is Barbara. And because my list crosses over so much with Marjorie's, I'm just going to refer everybody to the Sidney Taylor Book Award list, because not only do we have winners and silver medalists, we have notables and such a beautiful list of books that I couldn't even name them all. But, of course, I have to say my very favorite, close to my heart, is Sidney Taylor's All of a Kind Family. They stand the test of time. Yeah. The ultimate crossover. Every family should have a whole set. Thank you, Lizzie Skurnick, who's brought them out again.
Amen.
They gave me a sense of belonging that nothing else did, and then I grew up to work on the committee. So to me, those books are family members, and that's my list.
This is Alyssa. One of the other classics that I remember growing up was E.L. Konigsberg about the B'nai Bagels, which was one of the first encounters, aside from the Olive Kind family, which I also loved. But that was the first, I think, contemporary kid Jewish book that I remember coming across. More recent stuff, I Lived on Butterfly Hill, which is the book that I mentioned earlier. I won't repeat the trashy YA titles. My favorite picture book from last year, which won the Sidney Taylor Award, is My Grandfather's Coat, which
so
is
good.
Just so it makes me cry every time I read it. And it's not sad. It's not sad, but there's just something about it that just really hits me. And it's sort of an immigration story, but not, and a family story, and a Jewish story, but not just. And it's so beautifully illustrated, and I think it could touch a lot of different families. I really like the Very Strange series by Tamar Stein. The first book was called Kindred. I think the girl is half Jewish, contemporary girl, modern day, living her life, visited by a really violent angel. They're very strange. Again, not specifically Jewish, but I believe she's half Jewish, and there's a lot of interesting theology sort of melded into the story without being a main focus. There are so many. I love 2 Holocaust books last year that were on the notables list. I want to say, I think one was a notable and one was an honor. Hidden, A Child Story of the Holocaust, which was a sort of graphic novel-ish thing, but picture book, so it's for younger graphic novel experience. And The Whispering Town, which is a Holocaust book, but it's more of a righteous Gentiles save their community, but in a really interesting graphic sort of a way. Graphic illustrating wise, not like blood and guts wise. I love the Sam and Charlie and Sam 2 easy readers.
Yeah.
Which are just very simple, easy readers. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 5-year-old, both boys, and they love those books. Characters are Jewish, and the books are Jewish, but they're very approachable for anyone. And I have many more, but I'll stop there. Oh, wait, one more. Flea Rain Loves Franny was my other favorite bizarre book from last year.
And nobody buys it, so let's pitch the shit out of that one. Sorry.
It's just so strange. It's an example of...
It's so weird.
It's an example of a really bizarre, like a Jewish book, but like nothing you've ever read before, except it's like Charlotte's Web, but it's not really like Charlotte's Web. So it's just, I think, a really great example of the diversity of what there can be out there, because it's just an interesting story that has Jewish content, but it has appeal for anyone who likes strange animal fantasy.
I'd also like to just mention any books by Anna Levine. Her books tend to be about Israel and experiences in Israel, but they are so lovely.
Because she lives there.
Yes, and they are great. So anything by Anna.
Yeah, part of me wants to say what I'd love is to get this list of books and then see how many copies they've sold. To see whether or not I could actually use them as high watermarks.
Is there a place you can look that up?
No. There's BookScan, but that doesn't take into account library sales, which are often a very big part of these. And it only does a certain percentage of bookstore sales anyway. So I want to mention Ari Goldman's The Path of Names, which I loved. That was kind of, for me, like the Holy Grail. And it was interesting that it was acquired and edited by, not me, but Cheryl Klein, who is not Jewish. So there. She also was the editor of a really lovely picture book called I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Dreidel.
Oh, so good. So cute.
Such a funny, irreverent and wonderful book. He's published some wonderful translations on my list. Hidden Like Anne Frank by Marcel Prins, and it tells the story of his mom, who was hidden as a child. The fact that it's translated from the Dutch is important because so many people know the story of Anne Frank, but she's often seen as singular, as because she was an incredible individual, but there were many, many other people who had that experience, and this is a group of interviews with Dutch survivors who were hidden as children. It's a very powerful book. And years ago, we published Samir and Yonatan, which is
that's nice.
A wonderful story of friendship between an Israeli and a Palestinian boy that was written in Hebrew originally, and we translated it. And this is funny. I feel like I can only say this in this virtual room. So a book of my own was published called The Very Berry Tooth Fairy. It was my most recent book, and really, I feel like it was too hidden of a Jewish book. So I got to tell you, here's the story. It's this bear who has a loose tooth, and he's told by his mother that he's supposed to avoid humans because they're dangerous and unpredictable. And then he sees a human mom tell their child about the tooth fairy, that if he leaves his tooth alone, the tooth fairy will come and, give him a treat. So then he becomes panicked that the tooth fairy might be a human. And he goes about asking all his friends about the nature of the tooth fairy. It's hard to know. Like, his friends will tell him, well, I know that the Easter Bunny's a bunny, but, I don't know about this. I think Santa Claus is a bear because I've seen him, And I feel like only Jews really sit around and say, hey, do you think he could be Jewish? His last name's Cohn. What about him? Schwartz, that could be Jewish or German. And I feel like because it wasn't published as an explicitly Jewish, probably the only people who could really have understood the book didn't read it. Oh, it was sad. It's out there in libraries somewhere if anyone wants to read it.
That reminds me of something I wanted to mention is what I think of as stealth Jewish books, and that fits right in.
Yeah,
it's reminding me
Jewish
of
book.
Yeah, of Arthur Ewing's book Company's Coming, which is about aliens who land in the backyard and come in and hang out with the family. And it's so Jewish, just the voices, not only the names of the people, but the way that they talk to each other and the way they respond to the situation.
For
it's
sure.
so Jewish, but it never says anything. Only people who already know that would notice. So,
well, Sendak too, right? I mean, those Wild Things were his Jewish relatives rumored to be.
Right. And then there's a few others that are less obvious in the way they act, but I like the fact that if you watch carefully, the names or a brief mention will tell you that it's a Jewish book, because then you kind of feel a kinship even though that's not anything to do with the story. Mm-hmm. For instance, Fancy Nancy. Did you ever notice when her grandparents have I think it's their big anniversary party, the names on the banner, her grandparents must be Jewish. Now, she's Nancy Clancy, but she must be from a family where the grandparents, maybe on her mother's side, are Jewish.
Just like the author Jane O'Connor.
There you go. That must be why they did it. And then the novel Wonder, which is such an amazing book. Yeah. He mentions at one point that I think on his father's side, they come from Eastern Europe and they're Jewish, and his mother is Brazilian. And they don't say whether they're Jewish and Brazilian. But, just a brief thing, nothing to do with the story, but that's cool. And then also I wanted to mention one more in this category, which is Laurel Snyder's book, Any Which Wall, which is very much in the tradition of E. Nesbit. It's like one of those magical adventure stories that happen to ordinary children. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book, and they happen to have a Jewish last name. I think it's Levine. And it's nothing to do with the story. And that actually came about because of a conversation I'd had with Laurel years earlier where we were talking about these subtle things you can do to make a book Jewish. I think she changed the name of the characters because we'd had this conversation, if I'm remembering right. So it's cool that not only are there these books that are written to be Jewish, but that it sneaks in. And so there's more books that could count as Jewish. Just like in the conversation you're saying that we always sit around and have and say, do you think this one's Jewish? You can have the same conversation about books as you can about people or tooth fairies.
Yeah.
So, but Arthur, did you have other titles that you wanted to
No,
talk
that's
about?
okay. That's okay. I'm good.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure to mention that when you talked about how Mirka got her sword, that's actually the subtitle, and the title is Hereville. And the whole series is Hereville, and there's 2 so far and another in the works, I believe.
Well, How Mirka Got Her Sword is the title. Hereville is the series title.
Okay, Hereville is the series title, and that's the title of that volume, is How Mirka Got Her Sword. And then the next one is Mirka Meets a Meteorite, I believe. Anyway, those are excellent graphic novels by Barry Deutsch, and the first one won the Sidney Taylor Book Award a few years ago. I also wanted to mention a recent favorite of mine, Playing with Matches by Suri Rosen, which is a YA novel, and you were talking about the difficulty of getting mainstream readers to relate to the discussion of marriage. And in this one, I guess they sort of solved it by having the older sister be the one who wanted to get married. It's very much about matchmaking within the Orthodox community, but it's done in a way that's just funny and very relatable, and anybody would enjoy this book. It's really a fun romp, I would call it.
It doesn't Shabanu, Daughter of the Wind, concern marriage as well? Or is it Haveli, the sequel? One of them does.
I think you're right.
Those are quite successful.
Yeah.
But anyway.
No, that's a good point. There was a book from a few years ago called A Bottle in the Gaza Sea that was about Israeli and Palestinian kids who end up communicating. I forget if it was by email. It wasn't literally a note in a bottle, but it was that kind of feeling that they just sort of ended up communicating and becoming friends long distance. That was really good.
I liked that one because the Palestinian kid was really, really angry. I thought it was good. I thought it was really nuanced.
A couple of picture books, just to mention from my childhood, The Rabbi and the 29 Witches was my favorite Jewish book as a little kid, and it's very funny. And that's been reissued more recently, so it's available again. Never Say a Mean Word Again by Jacqueline Jules is a recent book. It's a wonderful story about getting past bad feelings and enmity and figuring out how to work together and become friends, and maybe it's even anti-bullying. I guess you could think of it that way too. I think it's definitely anti-bullying. It's Sephardic. It's a diverse one. Right. And then one more that also is about different kinds of diversity is The Mitten String by Jennifer Rosner. That was pretty recent. And that's a book that's about deafness within the Jewish community. Jennifer Rosner, who I believe has deafness in her family, and so it's written with a really respectful, loving tone about a Jewish deaf woman and how she communicates with her child, and how the Jewish strangers who take her in when her cart is broken down learn about deafness and try to find ways to make her life easier. So anyway, those are a few titles that I just wanted to mention as well. And I think we'll create one huge book list, and then we can make one of those resources that we're saying people need. Make a printable thing that they can take to the bookstore, to the library.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice having this conversation, everyone. I enjoyed it.
I just want to say how lovely it's been to chat with all of you, and I think conversations like this change the world, one teeny tiny step at a time, and it's such a treat, and I'm so happy to have had this opportunity. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/Book of Life. Leave a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can also like our page at facebook.com/Book of Life podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life pod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening and happy reading.